President and Managing Partner of Summit 7, and he has served at NASA as a Chief Engineer for the NASA Data Center. And Scott is a graduate of West Point and has a Master's of Information Security from James Madison. So I'm going to let you take it over.
All right, thanks a lot, Sean. Appreciate it. I'm really excited to finally be able to talk about CMMC level 3 within the 1.0 release. We've all been waiting on this now for 6, 7, 8 months now, as we have been waiting on this release to come out. So this is the agenda that we're going to cover today. We're going to go over the CMMC schedule. We're going to talk about we're going to go through an overview of 1.0 and level 3 specifically. I'm going to go through what I'm calling the Big 20. We'll hit all of those new practices to what you're going to have to do to get to CMMC level 3. A couple slides on potential technical solutions for some of these new requirements. We're not going to go too deep in that. We're going to reserve a lot of that for follow-on webinars where we can really dive into some of the solutions that we're looking at, talk about some upcoming events, and then do Q&A. So that's a quick overview of the agenda. All right, so what everybody's interested in is the schedule. How does this thing look now? Is the CMMC team and the accreditation board, are they on track? What does the next year look like? So based on the schedule that was put out on Friday during the presentation, we distilled it down to the items, the events that we felt like most people would really be interested in, and that's what you see on the screen now. We did have the release of 1.0 there at the end of January. The accreditation board was established back in January, and now the accreditation board is going to be doing their thing for a couple of months here, trying to get everything ready for being able to move into things like the marketplace release in May, where you can go find C3PAOs. Doing things like getting ready for training for level 1 through 3, and then eventually level 4 and 5 later in this year. We have even as early as July, August. It's possible that they may start looking at updating the CMMC standard. So this is not going to be a static standard. Just as the attackers don't rest. The board is not going to be able to rest with the standards that are out there. So, it's something that we can look forward to expecting is kind of a consistently changing, target, if you will, from a security control standpoint. And then the dates that everybody has been looking forward to or watching are the dates when RFIs and RFPs will start dropping. Those dates have not significantly changed since the original release of the time periods back with the .4 release back in September. We're still looking at June, July for RFIs and October for RFPs to be released with these CMMC standards. I do have some additional updates that were talked about and released last week that we'll get to in just a few slides. All right, so the breakdown of the model framework. The framework itself did not change significantly between the .7 release and the 1.0 release. They did update the numbering methodology, which you can see here on the screen. There's a total of 17 domains with each one of the practices broken out level 1 through 5. There's a total of 43 capabilities. You can see the domains are broken down into capabilities. And then, so we've got 43 total capabilities across all 17 domains. And then inside each one of those capabilities, there are specific practices. Okay, so you can see here the numbering methodology. The first two letters are the specific domain. The next letter is the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then finally the last three numbers are the practice number specifically for that practice. So that's a quick breakdown of the model framework as it sits. So these are how the practices break down among each level. The negatives and positives you see there are the differences between what was available in .7 and what came out in 1.0. Okay, so if you break it down, we had 3 practices removed from level 2, and then you see 2 practices added to level 3. So essentially what happened there is we had 2 practices that moved from level 2 to be level 3 requirements, and we had 1 practice that was removed altogether out of the model. Same thing down on level 5, we had 1 practice removed in level 5. Okay, so now we're at a total of 130 practices that are going to be required as part of level 1 through 3. and an additional 41 practices required in levels 4 and 5 for a total of 171 practices. All right, on the process side, pretty significant change between .7 and 1.0 on the process side. They removed a number of processes from being required. If you remember, there were 9 total processes in the .7, and we have that down to 5 practices now with the 1.0. Or I'm sorry, processes in the 1.0. All right, you can see the pattern. The pattern holds true across all 17 domains. In level 2, you have to establish policies. And then document the practices to implement that policy. Level 3, you have to establish, maintain, and resource a plan for that domain. Level 4 is review and measure the activities, and level 5 is standardize and optimize. So, the total number of processes have obviously dropped. They did actually combine a couple of them, especially at the level 3 there. You can see, those were broken out into multiple processes at one point in time, but now they've been, the established, maintain, and resourcing is now within a single process. So they still are talking about FCI versus CUI within the model. Big change between .7 and 1.0 is now that at the 1.0 release, they have moved all of the level 2 controls to talk about controlled unclassified information instead of federal contract information. So if you remember, when we went from the .4 to the .6, they changed all of the level 1 and level 2 practices to only specify federal contract information. And level 3 is where we saw our first indications of controlled unclassified information. That's changed now. They've moved. They've basically made it possible that you may end up having controlled unclassified information at level 2 as well as at level 3. So just a bit of commentary on this. I see a potential issue with that, and I'm trying to get some clarification on that, because if you have controlled unclassified information within your organization and you have a DFARS clause, you have to protect it with 800-171, right? And you have to meet those requirements under the DFARS clause. And everything that's in level 2, level 2 by itself would not be enough to cover all of the requirements in NIST 800-171 and DFARS. So it's almost like it's you may have a DFARS clause in a level 2, and it ends up being like a level 2.5 kind of situation because of your additional requirements you have to do with 800-171. But there's still some questions to be answered on exactly how that's going to work with level 2 companies holding controlled and classified information. So that's something that we're still digging in on. All right, so big questions. How do DFARS and CMMC overlap? All right, we have a 2-gate process now. We know we're not CMMC is not going to be replacing the DFARS requirements. All right, what we do have is we have a large overlap in the middle between CMMC and DFARS of NIST 800-171. Okay. So if you have a DoD contract, you've got a DFARS 252-204-7012 requirement. You have to meet everything in that red shape there, including things like if you're going to the cloud, you have to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent. You have to meet the paragraph C through G for forensic information and incident response, and then you also have your requirements to do 72-hour reporting after a breach for breach notification to DIBNet, right? Well, you have to do that, because of your DFARS requirements. On the other side, with CMMC, if you're going for level 3, not only do you have NIST 800-171 requirements, but you have the 20 additional practices that we're going to cover later in the briefing here, and then the additional 52 maturity processes that you have to have in place. So, when you look at the whole scope of what you have to do, it's the 20 additional practices, the 52 maturity processes, all of NIST 800-171, FedRAMP moderate equivalent if you're going to the cloud, paragraph C through G requirements, and your reporting. All of that is what encompasses your requirements as a whole as a DoD contractor doing business with DoD. Now, one big change that they made in the change from .7 to 1.0 is that previously all of the conversation about CMMC had been that you would have to have the CMMC 3PAO audit complete with the certification to submit as part of your RFP. They backed off on that a little bit now saying that while the CMMC level will be identified in the RFI or RFP, you do not have to actually submit your certification until contract award. So basically, at contract award, you're going to have to sign your reps and certs that say you meet DFARS, and you're going to have to submit your CMMC audit results that say you meet the CMMC requirement for that contract. If you can't do either one of those, then my assumption is that they would you would be not eligible for that award, and they would go to the next offerer, the next team who does meet the requirements. So that's a bit about how it overlaps. So the source material. So the CMMC working group did completely drop ISO 27001 from the source material. You will not find any references to ISO 27001 in the 1.0. They did have a couple of practices that do map back to ISO 27001, but instead of having it as an official source material, they actually now have it referenced back to just the CMMC working group. And so that allowed them to drop ISO 27001 as a referenced standard. All of the other reference standards stayed the same. NIST 80171, the FAR, the 80171B, the CIS controls, 853, the resilience management model, etc. These are just some items of note as I listened to the press conference last week, as I have gone through all of the information available in the 350 plus pages that I was so happy to dig through this weekend. That was who doesn't want to read 350 pages of standards documentation on the weekend, right? So I went through that and pulled this information out. So first of all, what's it going to take to get CMMC certified? Level 1, you're going to have 17 controls. Level 2, you got 72 practices. Level 3, you're going to have 130. Level 4, 156, and level 5 is 171. Okay, we're going to dive into that level 3, those 20 other practices here in just a few slides. Your SSPs and POAMs are still required, okay? So as part of 80171, you have a requirement to have a system security plan and a plan of action and milestone. Now, that plan of action and milestone is not necessarily going to do you any good when you're going through a C3PAO audit. All right. So if you are pursuing a level 3 certification, you cannot have a POAM action item of one of the requirements, those 130 requirements that is on that POAM. All of those would have to be marked off. Now, you could have on that POAM enhancements. You could have on that POAM requirements that you're looking at potentially going to level 4 and those kinds of items. That's what you would have on the POAM at that point in time. But you have to have no POAM items for the specific version or the specific level that you're pursuing during that specific audit. Okay. I'm going to dig into the new technical solutions and requirements in some of the following slides, but these are the big technical items that you have to pay attention to with the additional practices under CMMC Level 3. Security information event management, backup and restore, DNS filtering, isolating unsupported platforms, secure management protocols for managing network devices, and your spam and email protections. Those are going to be the focus areas from a technical standpoint that you're really going to have to focus on to move from a NIST 80171 compliance stance to a CMMC Level 3 compliance stance. And while we're talking about NIST 80171, I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing out there in the industry with companies that we're working with on how they are trying to get NIST 80171 compliant for DFARS by itself. These are just a few items. I picked out 5 or 6 that we are consistently seeing poor implementations or no implementations of with companies that we're working with. Okay. Change management is almost non-existent in most companies, especially when you talk about doing things like change logs and true baseline configurations of an environment. We don't see that in most situations. Most companies don't have CUI data flow diagrams, basically documenting everywhere that CUI exists in your environment and how CUI moves through your organization. Risk management plans and mitigation plans, we don't see a lot of those. Audit logging or retention, we don't see a lot of those specifically when you talk about from a SIM solution. We see it decentralized but not centralized. Blacklisting and whitelisting of software is not happening in most companies, at least most smaller companies, say under a couple thousand employees. And then finally, workstations and server configurations and management of user-installed software. So have those workstations, have those servers been configured in NIST 800-171? In most cases, they haven't. Most companies are trying to first, secure the server locations that have controlled and classified information, maybe the cloud platforms, but the workstations and servers haven't necessarily been configured at this point. So those are just some things to pay attention to as you're looking at continuing your trek toward 800-171 compliance. Those are some high points that you may want to pay attention to. All right, some other notes. They are not going to go back and require certification for existing contracts. So if you only have a single contract and you're not planning on pursuing any additional contracts, then you basically are not going to have to worry about CMMC certification until you are coming up on the renewal of that single contract. All right. You're going to have the C3PAO certifications prior to contract award. That was the change I talked about earlier. Certifications are going to be good for 3 years. There's been a lot of debate about how long these certifications were going to be good for. Was it going to be 1 year? Was it going to be 2? Was it going to be 3? Was it going to be 5? It seems like they've settled on these third-party the 3PAO certifications being good for 3 years. In 2020, Katie Arrington said that their expectation is that, and actually Ellen Lord also said that their expectation is that they'll have 10 contracts with a total of 150 companies per contract in 2020 released. So that's a total of 1,500, potentially 1,500 companies that will have to have the CMMC certifications complete in calendar year 2020. Now, that's a relatively small number, but that's probably going to be some of your most active companies as well that are in the DIB. So it is going to make an impact in 2020. The focus of the contracts for these 10 are going to be things around things like nuclear, missile defense contracts, OTAs, SIBRs, and STRs. All right. So I had heard a lot of conversation about, are we just going to start seeing a lot of contracts moved into OTAs in a way to attempt to bypass these CMMC requirements, so that we don't have to do them as small companies. They specifically said that's not the case. So some good news along that line is that I just found a SOCOM SIBR, a Phase 1 SIBR, that came out with some technical and business assistant funding that they specifically called out in the SIBR, where they are going to be providing $6,500 or allowing $6,500 in value over and above the value of the SIBR, specifically toward CMMC Level 1 compliance. So that was the first time I'd actually seen that written in a document. I thought it was really interesting. It's a good sign that they're looking at doing that, because that means that maybe there's going to be more of that in the future when we talk about SIBRs for Level 2, Level 3, and other requirements. So that's really good news. Okay. From a small business standpoint, they said that you should look to your PTACs for potential assistance. The PTACs, the regional PTACs, are going to be out there to help small businesses. We're going to have a phased rollout of CMMC in contracts through 2025 using the 5-year rolling contract window as kind of the standard. Ellen Lord and Katie Arrington both said that they're expecting that all new contracts in 2026 will have CMMC requirements. So we're going to basically have a 5-year phase-in stance with these. We're going to see 10 in 2020. Obviously, that's going to expand in 2021. So we're looking at a full rollout by 2026. We're also looking at potential DFAR 7012 changes coming later this year, as well as DODI 5000 series changes that they're working on right now. So what does that mean from a DFAR standpoint? We're not really sure yet. They haven't said what those changes are going to mean, but it's something that we all have to really pay attention to, because obviously we have to do both DFARs as well as CMMC. How are they going to continue to tie those together more tightly? Is DFARs going to now start referencing the CMMC standard? We don't know that yet. We have to wait and see. All right, so that was a lot of information on that slide. Thank you for giving me the time there to go through that. What I want to do now is really dive into what I call the Big 20. Before I do that, I see a time hack. I'm at 26 minutes in.